So I'm Jag Singh. I'm the managing director of Techstars here in Berlin. I'm one of Europe's most active angel investors, but I currently run the Berlin Accelerator for Techstars. We invest in 10 companies a year. We bring them in for 3 months, and we give them a whole lot of coaching and provide a ton of value through mentorship. And we then kind of send them out into the world and keep tabs on them and keep working with them forever.
This episode is brought to you by WHU, the Otto Beisheim School of Management. WHU is reshaping the way students learn about business, management, finance, and entrepreneurship through its innovative programs and partnerships in Germany and across the globe. To learn more about this globally ranked university, visit whu.edu today.
Hey folks, Gerrit here. In this episode, we introduce Jag Singh, entrepreneur, investor, political strategist, and currently managing director of Techstars Berlin. We're talking early stage startups, angel investing, acceleration, and Techstars' famous Give First ethos. So for you listeners out there who are either contemplating or just beginning your journey into startup life, this episode is for you. Hope you enjoy it.
Coming to you from WHU on the banks of the Rhine River in beautiful Vallendar, Germany. This is the best and most awesome founder podcast. A show about entrepreneurs, innovators, advisors, and educators, and the stories that make them who they are today.
Well, awesome. Jag, thank you so much for having me here in your new offices in Berlin. As you know, I'm a big fan and a big advocate of Techstars, as it was originated in my hometown of Boulder, Colorado, and have a lot of friends as part of this organization. So I've known about the Berlin program for a long time, and I've been really excited for this opportunity to meet you guys and see what's going on. And
awesome. We love seeing people from Boulder come by and no, it's great, and thanks for having me on this podcast. It's awesome.
So I'd like to start maybe by learning a little bit more about you. I think it's really important to kind of hear how you went from being a young person to being an entrepreneur, investor, and now being the MD here at Techstars in Berlin. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your journey.
All right. In a nutshell, I kind of I was born in Asia, grew up in the U.S., and then lived in London for a period of time. But a lot of the things that happen in my life are kind of, I tend to think of them, I tend to think that they happened by accident, not necessarily by design. So I went to college really early and kind of burned out after a period of time. And in that process of burning out, so this is, the U.S., this is the deep south in the U.S., in North Florida, pretty much South Georgia, town called Tallahassee. No one's ever heard of it, but it's a state capital for those of you listening who don't know. And, this was right or in the run up to the Iraq Wars. This is in 2003. And, I'm a junior in college, and there's some guy who's like being a little bit racist. And next thing I know, I decked him. For some reason, I decked him. But he was an acquaintance. We kind of knew each other. I picked him up off the ground, and unfortunately, a campus security guard saw this incident and he had to report it, which meant the university was like, "Hey, you're a good kid. Like, we know nothing's wrong, but just to cover our ass, we've got to get you to go see a anger management specialist." Anyway, long story short, like after 30 minutes, the anger management specialist, the shrink, is like, "All right, you're fine. You're a 17-year-old kid. Like you're good. Like you don't have any issues. You have hormones, and you need an outlet." So she says, "My husband's running for mayor. Why don't you come work on his campaign?" So I rock on up, and literally my very first day, my background's in math, and first day. They just, for some reason, assumed I could fix their computers. I wonder what gave them that impression. So they're like, "Hey, can you just?" I think something had happened to one of the computers. They're like, "Oh yeah, can you just flash the BIOS and then install this new motherboard in there?" And I was like, for some reason, I think my brain just lacks that ability to say no. So I was like, yeah, okay, sure. I went away. This is back in the day before like Amazon Prime or even before YouTube. So you can just look up how to open up a computer on YouTube and figure out how to do it. So went to the library, got a bunch of books, taught myself how to like open up a computer and look at the internals of a computer, and was like, oh, this is interesting. All right, figured it out. Showed up to the office a week later. They never really questioned why it took me a week to solve that problem out. But after a week, they kind of ran out of techie things for me to do. So they were like, hey, what else can you do? And I looked around and I realized there was a whole load of inefficiencies in the way that the business of politics was done. Political campaigns, were primarily run on pen and paper and a whole bunch of intuition. And I kind of started figuring out that there were ways of introducing technology into the processes behind the scenes to make everything more efficient. And so that was kind of my entry point into being an entrepreneur entirely by accident. Up until that point, I had assumed I was going to be an academic. And I caught the bug. And from that point on, I'd always been super interested in current affairs and news. But from that point on, I can trace it all back to that moment where I was like, damn, all right, politics. This is where the action's at. I want to be part of that. And then, that kind of one thing led to another. I ended up working for some incredibly cool politicians. John Kerry back in 2004, and then had a short stint in the UK working for some politicians there in 2005. And then I moved back. I got called back to work for Hillary Clinton for 3 years, which was amazing, especially when you're 23, 24. And suddenly you have all this power and control, and you're playing around with data, and you're seeing a ton of things. And so, all my entrepreneurial ventures have come out of the political or media markets. My first startup was effectively an ad tech company that was wrapped around an algorithm that I'd written that, back in 2006, we kind of patented and licensed out to a company that was then acquired by another company that was then acquired by Facebook. How the way these things work. Second company, was a media property, again focused on the political market. Building communities. It was kind of like a Reddit, but I guess you could say it was a hyper-targeted Reddit before Reddit became really big. And that was, we had an exit to a large media publishing firm in the UK. The third company was a crowdfunding platform for politicians. I learned more about the regulatory kind of challenges that politicians face than anyone ever needs to know. We learned about the nuances of raising money and spending money for politicians on the politician's perspective. We had this weird situation where some of the politicians were raising more money than they were legally allowed to spend. In some countries, there's spending limits, and you got to be creative around that. And that was super interesting. And then the fourth one was a big data company, again aimed at advocacy and kind of large scale kind of grassroots movements. But that one didn't quite work out. And I'm actually glad it didn't, because a couple of years later, pretty much the same idea was pitched by Cambridge Analytica, and I'm glad we didn't go down that rabbit hole.
Right.
Yeah, and along the way, I started investing in startups as an angel. I thought, what better way to learn than to spend some of my own cash, and along the way, invested in a few accelerators, invested in a whole bunch of companies all around the world, mostly. The companies are all around the world, but most of the action was in the US and the UK. And after amassing a portfolio of a large number of early stage startups, some of them started to go through to Series A, Series B rounds. And I started to take this a little bit more serious. And I thought, okay, well, I want to be a professional investor. And I'd invested in 3 companies that went through Techstars. So I kind of knew the folks at Techstars. We all thought, we saw the world in the same way. And they were super nice and you've got experience with Techstars people. They can be addictive, and just the mood and the vibe. And so about a couple of years ago, there was an opportunity to move to Berlin, and then I took it. I jumped at it because I had never worked in Europe. I've worked in Asia, I've worked in the US, I've worked in the UK. And as we know, the UK is not part of Europe.
Not for long, at least. Right?
Not for long, who knows? So, Berlin gave me a soft landing to all of Europe. And yeah, I'm a year and a half in, I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, well, you're in a place of incredibly high energy, I think, right now. This is one of Europe's fastest growing cities, and now I guess it's largest tech hub. Is that?
I think so. I lose track. I mean, the nice thing is, or the cool thing about Berlin is that you've got proximity to some amazing hubs. They may be smaller, they may even be bigger. From Amsterdam to Paris to Munich, to like Romania, Bucharest and Sofia. They're all like an hour and a half away at most. So yeah, it's really cool to be like right in the middle, in the center ground.
I'm interested in your background a little. You came from a mathematics background, so you obviously had some technical capacities in there as well. You built these few businesses. It sounds like they were largely bootstrapped, or were you raising capital for those businesses?
The first one was actually we raised a small kind of friends and family round. By friends and family, I mean I also got some really dumb investors involved. I remember my first angel investor was a pub landlord. He gave me £10,000 or 10,000, basically £10,000 for 10% of the company. And no, he didn't even offer me like office space in the pub. He got a really nice, healthy 3,000% return on his investment, but it's one of those moments where you realize, the value of having. We throw this term smart money around a lot, but I realize there's a lot of value in having angel investors who really get it and who understand how to help early stage young entrepreneurs. I mean, I was 21 and, thought I could sort of tackle the world and take on the world and just, tackle every challenge that came my way. Yeah. Every 21-year-old thinks he or she is invincible. But I got my ass handed to me a few times, and I look back now, and had I surrounded myself with real mentors, not just people who just wanted to be on the journey, I'm pretty sure I would have had a much easier path, and probably also more rewarding. Because I look back at some of those entrepreneurial experiences, and they were hard, and there's a part of me that just it's probably dead, having been through those, and I think you've experienced some of those as well. And so it's one of the things that made me really think, really kind of sit up when the opportunity at Techstars came around, because we are all about mentorship, right? And every program has a curated pool of mentors. So that was probably one of the biggest learnings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I had the same experience, or very similar experience for sure, in terms of, you're young and you're myopically focused, and you think you can solve every problem along the way, and you're running 100 miles an hour, and sometimes you don't take the time to reflect and to seek the wisdom of other people because you're so goal focused at that time. And that's why programs like this, I think, can be so powerful. And I want to talk about that in a second. But I'm interested in your transition in going from an entrepreneur to being an investor. I like to tell people that everything I learned about venture capital, I learned from screwing up myself and messing up cap tables, picking the wrong investors. And most of the anxiety and loss of well-being I had during some of my entrepreneurial journeys were a result of those anxieties from essentially bringing on team members in exchange for capital that may not have been the exact fit that I was hoping for.
Absolutely.
As someone that went from university straight into being a multiple-time founder, how do you feel like you learned how to be a good investor? Was it trial and error? Was it your own entrepreneurial experiences? Maybe you can talk about that kind of transition.
It was a mixture of both, I'd say. My own experiences were, I'd say, riddled with a lot of challenges and also errors. I definitely can look back and say I made a ton of mistakes. But it was also a different time. In 2005, 2006, people weren't sharing, what was going wrong, right? Like Medium wasn't around, right? Like today, you could just look at you just look up Medium and you'll find 20 stories kind of dissecting how a startup failed or how a startup may have succeeded or what makes a startup succeed. Back then, we didn't have this body of knowledge. And so one, if you're an entrepreneur today, you should be very thankful. You have all these resources at your disposal. But being an investor requires a very different set of skills than being an entrepreneur, right? Because when you're an entrepreneur, you're really in control. When you're an investor, it's actually about, I think probably the most important skill I learned wasn't through my entrepreneurial background, but through my political background. It's about reading people. It's about being able to kind of assess whether someone's really telling you what they think they want you to hear or what they're really saying, and kind of digging into that. So I just assume that most entrepreneurs, even the ones I've invested in, are probably lying to me at some point, right? Because they're telling me a version of the truth that they want or they see as a potential version. And so, being a good angel investor actually requires digging down and not necessarily judging them because, just going back to my political background, we used to run polls for, so we used to do opinion polling for some political parties, and we'd call up voters in random constituencies, and they'd be very adamant and saying, I've voted for this party my entire life, and I voted for that candidate, and I'm like, that candidate didn't even stand in the last election, so how'd you vote for him? But in their heads, they came out of the ballot box thinking that they voted for that person. And you can't fault them for it. And it's the same with entrepreneurs. You have to kind of dig in and really understand what's motivating them, why they're kind of saying some of the things that they're saying, and what they really want to do. And then it's the second realization is, and this probably comes from being an employee, is when you're an angel investor, you don't really have that much control, right? You can give as much advice as you want, but ultimately you're on the entrepreneur's journey. The entrepreneur's not on your journey, and it's really important to have that positioning right. And so I guess those are the kind of formative experiences that I've kind of taken with me and hopefully have made me a better investor. I don't think I'm a great investor yet. Give me another 20 years and I'll get there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to learn in that experience, and I think you have an interesting background in that you've been an entrepreneur and you've been now an investor in multiple parts of the world. Yeah. And, I feel like a lot of my most valued, at least personally valued experience is my entrepreneurial experience in different cultures and in different settings. You really learn a lot by dealing with different mentalities, different ways of doing business. Yeah. I'm curious to hear a little bit about your experience as an investor in these different contexts, both the way you do business and perhaps how you see other angel investors doing business. And I was telling you offline that, I was here in Germany 10 years ago, raising capital, and had a very challenging and different experience. And within 6 weeks, I had raised my first round after I moved back to the US. Right. And so I'm curious about what you see as maybe some of the differences between angel investors, particularly in the early stage. I think that's the majority of the audience we're kind of talking to here, and how you see early stage investors in Europe and Germany, the UK versus the US, and any opportunities or obstacles you might see.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, it's a big one. Where do we start? How much time we have? I guess, okay, so let's break that down. In terms of the differences, I guess, angel investors are mostly shaped by their own experiences. I mean, it doesn't take it's an obvious thing to say. But when you dig a little deeper, I guess, you look at the angels that were successful here in Germany over the last few years, and many of them were successful because they invested in, many of them were successful in investing in specific types of companies led by a specific type of founder. And so these biases are actually very natural. And, as long as the music keeps playing and the parcel keeps getting passed around, there's not really a problem with it. But when the music stops or slows down, that's when the game is literally up. And so, the Berlin ecosystem was shaped by the growth of and fueled by the growth of marketplaces. And, many of the founders who led those marketplaces then became angels. And so the cycle has continued for quite some time. But yeah, I think the strength that I see from the Berlin perspective is, Berlin's been shaped by its most recent history. There's been a clash of cultures, right? You've got the capitalists, you've got the socialists, and you've got the anarchists. And, for the last 20, 25 years, it's been this, you've had people from all over the world, mostly from Europe, the kind of educated, incredibly educated, but also educated and world aware kind of misfits from around Europe coming to Berlin to make it their utopia. And now increasingly we're seeing, people who don't necessarily fit in the US start to think of Berlin as a suitable kind of second base. You can kind of look at the contrast that provides to the second and third generations that have come out of the Mittelstand families, who have incredible amounts of wealth and resources and tools and talent at their disposal. And also come from a background where it's the methodical kind of German way of let's actually analyze something before we shoot our mouths off, and compared to the kind of someone referred to me as a wild-eyed, American cowboy the other day, because I tend to shoot my mouth off. And proud of it. But you contrast that with the German kind of methodical way of doing things, and what actually comes out of that is quite beautiful, because you get this clash of different cultures and backgrounds, which you normally, funnily enough, you wouldn't get in a lot of places that we would consider diverse. So I speak to a lot of investors, and some of them are like, well, we've got to start diversifying, and we're looking for diverse founders and companies with diverse teams and companies with diverse founders. So we're going to go invest in India. I'm like, that's cool, but you're very likely to invest in a company, or you're very likely to talk to a company that, whilst the founders may be of a different skin color or come from a different religion or whatever, they're actually still very homogenous, because they're homogenous to that culture, right? They're homogenous to that background. And so again, going back to the strengths of Berlin, I think what a lot of angel investors are starting to realize now is there's an incredible amount of diversity just in Berlin alone. And it's happened all naturally, which is super exciting. It's not, it's not been imported in by the government like you see in Russia or even in the UK, where there's tax incentives that distort the fundraising ability for early stage startups. This is the angels in Berlin are putting their hard-earned cash into companies, And I think a lot of them are learning from their experiences, which I can't fault.
I'd be interested to ask one more question about angel investing. I want to make sure I got time with Techstars, but a lot of the audience who will be listening to this are young people that are nascent entrepreneurs or on their first startup journeys and potentially looking for that early stage capital. As someone who is now steeped in the German ecosystem a little bit more, maybe you could share what you look for, what types of criteria you look for early stage investments.
I made the mistake a long time ago when I first started out, actually. I used to invest in companies because of the idea, right? I fell in love with an idea and I was like, oh my God, this idea is going to kill it. And it's going to take over the world. And I'm going to make $1 billion by being the first investor in this. And let's just say that was a very easy exercise and losing a lot of money. And I kind of hit this point about 4 or 5 years ago where I started to realize the companies that were increasingly successful were led by founders who had a ton of experience in the domains and the industries that they were tackling. So some of the investors or some of the academics have coined terms that describe this, but the way I like to talk about it is founder market fit. Right? Is this founder or set of founders, are these set of founders the best people to tackle this market? And for super early stage companies like pre-seed, seed, that's really all you have to go on, because the founders are going to be the ones that have the most amount of experience in this industry. They're going to have the most amount of knowledge about the problem and hopefully the customers, as long as they're talking to the customers. And those are the kinds of founders I like to bet on, right? And in recent years, so in the last couple of years, I've added a filter to that, or a new dimension, which is I like betting on underestimated founders, because that's where I see the most upside. And funnily enough, there's a ton of them. Some of them are obviously women, some of them are people of color, some of them have different sexual orientations, but many of these are underestimated by the vast majority of investors out there. So you could call it, you could say I'm taking a slightly contrarian view to investing, but I feel like that's the one that's a strategy that I'm most comfortable with. And if you're an angel investor, it's all about picking one strategy and then sticking to it, because angel investing isn't, it's not like betting on the stock market where stock price could go up by volatility could increase by 20% in one day. Angel investing is a long-term game, right? You can't do it, and you don't see results for at least 2 or 3 years. You won't see your money back if you do at all for 7 or 8 years sometimes. And you've got to. I see a lot of angel investors making the mistake of investing in one round and then trying to cash out of the next, and that's not really angel investing. That's just making money on the journey, right? Like angel investing is a long-term prospect, because you will find companies go from pre-seed to seed to Series A and do really well. But then once they hit Series B or C, that's when they start to struggle with scaling or not really having the right culture in place. And these are all things that you have to learn as an angel investor to look out for, because a company that doesn't have its culture right from the get-go is probably not going to succeed or go very far. Again, there's always exceptions, but and if you learn to spot that when you're looking at a company in the seed stage, you're going to be so much better for it.
When we brought a group of students to Boulder this past spring, David Brown was talking about in detail about what Techstars looks for in companies. And, he said his top 3 criteria are team, team, and team. And, I think you hear that a lot these days, but really breaking that down a little bit and understanding, what do you mean by team? Is it they're, obviously these are intelligent, motivated people for the most part, but really understanding that they have domain expertise, that, they have the right culture between one another, that, and I thought it was interesting, the underrepresented side a little bit too, that sometimes fuels a fire that other people may not necessarily have, or used to being the underdog. And I mean, what's a bigger underdog than being a startup founder,
Exactly.
So
exactly.
I think that's a really neat way to kind of think of it. I'm also interested, one of the things that I talk to young people a lot about is the process of choosing an investor. Oftentimes I had the experience where I hadn't had a paycheck in 22 months when I was building a company and bootstrapping it. And, I was watching our runway slowly dissipate, and you're desperate for capital. And all of a sudden you get someone offering you a 6-figure check, and you're going, this is, holy shit, this is the answer. Now I'm
Pay my phone bill now.
Exactly. I've got a place to sleep. I could pay the office bill or whatever it might be. But that often can lead down undesirable paths. Can you share a little bit about your thoughts on this idea of it's a two-way interview?
Yep.
And, I think so many people are thinking that we need to find the capital and that's the answer.
Yep.
But I always try to advise people is you're choosing, like you said, a 6 to 7 year partner in this process.
Yep. It's like a marriage.
Yeah. What do you think founders should look for in their angel investors?
I think there's 2 things that you want to look for. If you're a founder if you're a founder in 2019, 2020, and you're looking for an angel investor, you want someone who has it's not just about the angel investor themselves, but about the network that they can bring. Number one, you want to look for it, and there's probably 3 types of angel investors, right? Like there's angel investors who have extensive networks and lists of contacts. Those are good. There's also angel investors who are former operators, and will likely have thought about some of the challenges that you're tackling in whatever company you're building, and they may not have as big a network, but they're just as valuable, right? Because they can sit with you for 24, 48 hours at a stretch and go, right, no, this is how we did this back in the day. This is what else is going on in the market today. Here's how I would do it. And in many cases, I actually see a lot of some of the portfolio companies that I have. There's other angel investors who literally join them for like a week and are fixing bugs or helping them talk to customers, right? There's a lot of angel investors who are effectively paying you to be an operator. As a founder, I think that's an incredible bargain, and it's really worth it. And then there's the third type of investor, which is very passive, and you sort of want to just as an investor, you just give them a little cash and you say, well, call me once a quarter and let me know what's up, what's down, how I can help, whatever. Ultimately, I think angel investors, if you're a founder, you should be looking for angel investors who start the conversation with the words, how can I help you? Right? I think that really, everything else kind of cascades from that and just falls into place after you've made clear to the angel investor that, again, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but the angel investor is on the entrepreneur's journey. It's not the other way around, right? They're lucky to be investing in you. And again, they're investing in you, not even your company. So you have to get that positioning right. But once you do, everything else falls into place. I see a lot of founders now chasing, large valuations, and there's this phrase that someone said, I can't remember who said, if you're talking to an investor, the way it usually goes is, all right, the investor will say, well, you set the valuation and I'll set the terms, right? So you may find a lifeline in terms of cash injection from an investor, but the devil's always in the details, and the small print is something that a lot of early stage founders make the mistake of not really understanding. I see a ton of confusion around liquidation preferences. I see a ton of confusion around some of the other terms. And so I just think the most important thing is to understand, if you have an investor in front of you who is saying, yeah, I'll help you. Here's, a ton of cash, but I want 2x liquidation preferences, and a whole bunch of other rights, and the ability to buy the company at a discount if things don't work out. Walk away, right? Walk away. It's just not worth it.
Yeah, and it could screw up later investment rounds.
It will almost always screw up later investment rounds. I made this mistake once with one of my companies where we were negotiating with a investor, and the way the legal. So here's the good anecdote is this. We had a little mom and pop lawyer. We were paying him like $3,000 or something for the whole set of paperwork, and we'd entered into this conversation and negotiation with a big investor, and it wasn't until for about a week the investor's lawyers went cold, and for a whole week, and we were like, hey, what's going on? Maybe he just got cold feet or something, and it wasn't up until like a few months later that we realized. The opposing law firm, or the law firm that was representing the investor, was actually negotiating Wayne Rooney's contract in that same week, and so they were kind of busy. And so basically, we had one lawyer, and they had a team of 12, who for a week needed to just work on something else, and they would come back. And we were outmatched, and the way some of the legal documents were written, basically, if we missed our revenue projections by a penny, the investor would end up owning 99.9% of the company. Wow. Right? And that was like it was a small detail in the revenue forecast for 3 years down the line. But keeping control of your company is it's your company, right? If you don't have control of your company, then why are you building it?
Right. Yes, some of those horror stories of messing up your cap table, offering liquidation preferences that are not founder friendly. Yep. I know so many stories where people have gone on to A rounds or institutional capital, and they couldn't clean up the cap table. Right. So people that wanted to invest in them were forced to walk away. Yeah. So I think I had a conversation with Sven Groylik at Oric about these legal pitfalls on the podcast a few weeks ago, and I think that's something that in points of desperation can often get overlooked. Yeah. So, in the end, remembering that you as the founder, it's your business, it's your team, it's your idea, it's your company, you got to keep it that way. Are you finding that as an investor, and even potentially as the MD of Techstars, you're running into a lot of messy cap tables?
Tons. I'm still active as an angel, and I see, I'm seeing Series A companies where the CEO owns 8% of the company. Right. And it's like pretty much the only founder on the team left. And it's like, how is this company going to go, 3 or 4 more fundraising rounds? Like, how is this company going to become $1 billion company with CEO owns less than like half a tick or 0.5%? Like, that's not the way this works. So yeah, we see a ton of companies, and even at the earliest stage, Techstars tends to invest in companies pre-Series A. We see companies that have sometimes raised $1 million, and there's a lot of challenges that come with managing those investors and their expectations against the new direction that a company might take after they come out of our program, for example. I wish there was an easier way. I wish it was actually getting easier, but I think it's actually getting harder, because as more and more companies come into the market, as more and more angel investors start investing, there is no true north for angel investors out there. And I think probably one of the biggest challenges, if you're starting out a company today, even beyond hiring the right talent or making sure that you find that elusive product market fit, I think one of your biggest challenges today as a founder is getting the right set of investors on board. That's probably, I would say that's probably a bigger challenge than even finding the right talent today.
Right. Well, I think that's a good segue then into talking a little bit about the work that you're doing now, because obviously connecting founders to investors is a big part of what you guys do at Techstars. Can you maybe just start for those that aren't informed? I'm sure most people have an understanding what acceleration is, and I use that word lightly. I think it's tending to it's been bastardized in many ways in different contexts, and we had Jörg Reinbold of APX on here a few weeks ago as well, and he's hesitant to even use that term. He said it's been ruined in Germany. Yeah. But can you maybe just give us the kind of brief pitch on kind of how Techstars works and what it does and what the value proposition to an early stage startup is?
Sure. So the way we structure the accelerators is that they last for 12 weeks, and effectively the outcome that we're looking for is and again, I say the outcome that we, as in we, the people who run the accelerators, the outcome that we're looking for is we want to be able to help a company grow in that 3-month period, in that 12 weeks, it's probably the same distance or go the same distance that they would have on their own in 18 months, right? So it's literally about adding fuel to the fire. And so first there has to be a bit of fire. Because you can pour fuel over nothing and you'll still get nothing. You just get a little wet. And so the second outcome that we look for is kind of determined by the company founders themselves. And so we're probably the only accelerator that has an equity-backed guarantee. And the way that works is at the end of the program, if as a founder, if you don't believe you've had the value that we promised you, you can just buy your shares back at exactly the same price. Like, we're not going to treat you differently. We stand by our promise and our values. And I think it's those two things are what bookend the Techstars experience. In between, there's a ton of mentorship, so you get access to real mentors. And again, this is another bastardized term here in Germany, right? Like, mentors are a dime a dozen, but the mentors that we have a really curated network of mentors, and we talk about our accelerator programs as mentorship driven because ultimately it's the mentors that drive the direction or help drive the direction that these founders might want to take the companies in. And so, we've got some amazing mentors, some from competing accelerators, and we've got a ton of investors. We've got operators, people who've built their own companies, who are giving up their time voluntarily because they want to give back to the ecosystem. That's really what binds the Techstars family together. We're all people who have accomplished a ton. I mean, some of if you look at the managing directors, there's 45 of us around the world. Some of us have IPO'd, some of us have built companies from scratch, some of us have built really large companies from scratch, and some of us have very corporate backgrounds. But ultimately, we're this worldwide network that's there to serve the entrepreneurs and help the entrepreneurs succeed.
Tell me a little bit about the breakdown of your cohorts that you've been seeing here in Berlin. Obviously, you don't require them to be German companies, or even based in Berlin after the program. Can you talk a little bit about the demographics and what kinds of businesses you've had and maybe the types that you're looking for? Sure.
So we, we're a truly industry agnostic program. So we've had in the last batch, we actually, I caught a lot of flack for this because it was probably the only program run in Berlin that didn't have a single founder that was from Berlin or a single company that was even German. So we had a team from Australia, a team from Israel, 2 or 3 from the UK, a couple from Romania, one from the Netherlands, and one from Denmark. And I think that's a cool thing, because it highlighted that Berlin is such a melting pot, and the fact that we're able to attract these companies from places like Australia, and help them hone their pitch and build their products and deliver a ton of value, and then send them on their way either to the UK or US. I think that's worked for us. But the companies that applied, last year I think we spoke to about 1,000 different companies, and then we picked 10. So we're fortunate that we get to be very selective. But the companies that tend to come through, again, I have imprinted my own learnings into the Techstars program here, and so we look for companies that have that can exhibit founder market fit, right? That's probably the most important thing. The average age of the entrepreneurs that come in is probably late 30s, early 40s. Some of them are serial entrepreneurs. We had one entrepreneur in the last program. One of the founders had previously raised 40 million from Sequoia with his last company. But the way he was looking at the world was that, he'd had a lot of success, obviously, but also had done a lot of things right by accident. And, he said, look, I want to build a company again. I'm building this new company, but I want to get everything right. And I want to have a real network that works for me and with me, behind me on this journey. And I said, well, this is exactly what Techstars can do and deliver. And it's only been 8 months since we invested, but I think we're starting to deliver that, and we'll see. Again, it's unfortunate that we can't have almost real time results or results after just a few weeks, or months. But these are things that I think in a year's time you'll be able to look back and say, okay, actually we definitely did the right thing there. We definitely were able to help them. And obviously they vouch for us, so that helps. The other interesting thing was in the last batch, out of the 10 companies, 7 were led by female CEOs, which was an interesting experience, because I think the Berlin ecosystem wasn't necessarily ready for that. The Berlin investor ecosystem wasn't ready for that. The Berlin investor scene, the German investor scene, is very male dominated, and we saw that there were challenges that the female founders needed to kind of overcome in terms of how they were communicating their vision and their pitch and their businesses to these investors. But we're also incredibly lucky that we have a ton of recognition from the investors themselves that they need to understand how to speak to founders who don't look like them, right, or don't have their backgrounds. And so we saw a lot of investors come in and say, hey, look, I just want to make sure that I'm getting this right, and I want to make sure that I don't use language that's inappropriate or purposely offensive. And so help me out here. And so that was really, really rewarding to see that. But again, just to go back to your question, I think in terms of industry, the last batch had everything from fintech to deep tech. We had a couple of fintechs. We had one deep tech company focused on utilizing decentralized technologies. We had a couple of legal tech and HR tech companies, and then we also had a couple of consumer focused companies. So again, we take all sorts of companies as long as we feel that we can help them, and as long as we feel that we can help accelerate their businesses. There's usually usually no impediment to sort of saying, actually, let's take this company into our program.
How long has the Berlin Techstars program been operating?
We started in Berlin in 2015. And up until last year, we actually had 4 different programs running, 4 different Techstars programs. So Techstars has historically run what we call city programs. These are vertical agnostic programs or industry agnostic programs. And then in the recent years, we've also partnered with large corporations to help drive innovation in the corporation side, but also to unlock some of the talent and resources from the large corporations and deliver that to the startups that come into our programs. And so up until last year, we had 4 programs in Berlin, 2 in so we ran 2 programs in partnership with METRO, the big wholesaler. I actually ran one of those programs. We had one retail focused and one hospitality focused. And then we had another program in partnership with SAP. And last year we kind of had a restructuring, and we found ourselves just having one flagship program here in Berlin, the City program. And we've had probably through ourselves and our partners, we've probably invested in over 120 companies through our Berlin programs. And some of these are big now. I mean, we had Rasa.ai just raise 15 million from Index or Axel, I can't remember, one of the big tier 1 companies. We've had Impala that came through our Metro Hospitality program, just raised 10 million just a couple of weeks ago. And they've only been around for a couple of years. So we're starting to see companies succeed because of our efforts, but more importantly, because of the efforts of the founders. And we're starting to see the network that we helped curate around them, a network that we helped deliver to these founders and these startups start to really work in the favor of the startups and founders.
Cool. I want to talk about that a little more. I think that's interesting. We've talked a little bit about Techstars Touchpoint, which is the founder side and the recruitment of those businesses. But what about on the other side? Where do you pull your mentors from, and investors as well? You have such a huge network around the world. Yeah. Are you focused on having German mentors? Do you bring them in? And where do you find your investors as well?
The investors are that's the easy one because they will respond to the investors are only going to respond based on the strength of the companies we bring in, right? So we have to set a really high bar, and we help the companies understand how they should talk to investors before we set them loose on the investors. I sometimes feel bad for some of the investors because they just get bombarded with really well-crafted pitches, and I'm like, damn, we're making life hard for them, which is a good thing. So the investors are, that's an easy bit because as long as I have this mantra, as long as I pick great companies, everything else kind of falls into place, right? And the investors, I'm fortunate enough to have co-invested with many of the many angels around Europe, so I can sort of just give them a call or send them an email and say, hey, what do you think of this company? And they'll give me some candid feedback, even if they're not willing to do that directly with the startups. And then, through the brand, the Techstars brand, we're trying to make it easier for investors in other parts of the world to access companies that come into our programs and on the other side of the world. And so we're matching investors. We have loads of events every year, like large ones, where we bring founders and investors together, and we do lots of speed dating. We just had our big Techstars summit in Turin this past September, and we saw a lot of interest from investors from the U.S. Right, so we're definitely doing some things right. We can always do more, and I'm actually open to feedback and ideas. If any of you listening have ideas, shoot them my way. On the mentor front, we're very selective because, again, I think Jorg from APX will back me up here. If the term accelerator has been bastardized, the term mentor has also been bastardized. And funny enough, we've seen this in a lot of other programs. Mentorship in the US means one thing. Mentorship in India means something completely different, where it's almost transactional. And so mentorship in Germany is kind of somewhere in between. But we have a lot of people who just want to mentor for the sake of being mentors, and they don't quite understand the time commitment and the energy and effort it takes. And so we have a kind of vetting process for the mentors. I was fortunate when I took over the Berlin City program. I had a pool of really great mentors, and in the last couple of years, we've been trying to augment that with additional skill sets. So the mentors are usually curated to reflect the needs of the startups that come into our program, and so we'll have experts ranging from product to fundraising to literally any aspect of help that the founder might need, a startup might need. So we have a pretty extensive vetting process for those mentors. What we find is great mentors tend to actually refer other mentors, and so we grow that organically. But there's also a kind of an upper limit, right? Like you can't have 500 mentors because unfortunately we only have 10 startups, and that's one of the things we're trying to fix. We're trying to make the programs a little bit more open, and we're trying to make Techstars a little bit more open to the whole ecosystem. And so we're starting to, we're going to start delivering. We're going to start delivering like workshops, public-facing workshops, where we're going to get some mentors to come in and deliver some of these workshops. And, like one of our we've got a whole bunch of star mentors, but one of our mentors is Nuno Simaria from HelloFresh. Like he's a global CTO of HelloFresh, right? Got incredible technical background, technical skills, knowledge, and commands a whole army of people in tech. And he comes in, and if we can get him in and come do a workshop on setting the culture within engineering teams, and we want to be able to deliver that not just to our programs but also to literally the entire ecosystem. I'm a big believer that the rising tide lifts all boats, and so we're trying to double down on all that. Cool.
I want to ask one more question about Techstars, and we got to wrap up here pretty soon. But it's one of my favorite parts of this organization, and you see it at every Techstars office you go to. Brad has written about it extensively in his books. And when I brought the students from Germany to Boulder this year, it was this term that I think was the most powerful takeaway that they all had, which is this concept of give first. Coming from Boulder myself and being relatively early in that tech ecosystem, you live that. Yeah. It feels like there's an open door policy everywhere you go, and you reach out to someone and they're going to try to help before they say no. Can you share a little what Give First means to you, and maybe how you see that unfolding in the context of Berlin? Yeah, of course.
So I have to admit, when I first heard the term, I was very cynical. I'm a born cynic. So I first thought, oh God, it's one of those Boulder hippie things where you just give first. But actually, I saw it in action with the companies that I'd invested in. And I'd invested in these companies before I'd even heard of Techstars. In fact, like I'd invested in the companies before they went through Techstars. So, but I saw the Techstars ecosystem, the community, living this mantra in many of my own interactions with people who had been mentors in the in Techstars programs in London and in LA and in other parts of the world. And so, it's a very simple concept, right? It's just saying, well, you give first, and you give without expectation, and maybe you'll receive later. But who cares, right? If you just keep giving, and everyone keeps giving, we're trying to build a whole. The thesis we're trying to build there is we want companies that come out of Techstars to live that mantra, obviously, and we put it into practice throughout the program, and we show them how it can work and how it can deliver more value for them. But we're trying to build this theme around, a company that comes through Techstars should be seen as a company that is actually a great company to supply to, right? It's not just about companies that come out of Techstars, are great investments. Actually, like we want a large corporate to see, oh, well, this is a Techstars company. Actually, they pay they treat their people with respect. They pay their employees, and are fair to their employees. They treat others with kindness. They live this give first thing. We want to be part of that. So we kind of see it also as a differentiation. I mean, there is a business logic to it, and we see that as differentiation because we want employees to look at a Techstars company and go, potential employees to look at a Techstars company and go, I want to work for that company because they give first. And, I also want to then give first. So it's kind of our way of making, we talk so much about setting company culture and getting it right from the get-go. I think this is one of the ways that we're kind of making it a little bit more tangible and showing that, this is how you set culture apart from some of the other ways of doing it.
Do you see that Boulder thesis, this idea that is kind of grounded in give first, that, Brad Feld has talked so much about building ecosystems around this concept? Do you see that something that is replicable in such a large, diverse city as Berlin?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the it's one of the reasons why I chose Berlin and then chose to stay in Berlin, because kindness is everywhere. And, I see a lot of give first in Berlin. I see a lot of give first in again, not just in the mentors, but just, everyday interactions. And so I think it's a perfect city to kind of build up on that, make it Boulder 2.0.
Oh no. I don't know if we need another Boulder in this world, but okay, 2 rapid fire questions. I ask every single person that's on this podcast these questions. Some people hate them, but too bad, you're getting them anyway. So first one, what book's on your bedside table? What are you reading right now?
Oh God, I've got my Kindle on my bedside, and I'm trying to think what's the I've probably got like 7 unfinished books on my Kindle. I'm one of those guys. Yep. I think the one that I really am desperate to read is it's one of those Tom Clancy books. Yeah, it's one of those, like, it's fiction. It's I can't remember the name, but it's you get the idea.
Yep. Yeah. It's interesting. Every single person I've interviewed so far has had the same answer. Oh man, I have like 5 books that I'm like partway through. Yeah. But and it's either something about, building themselves, self-help entrepreneurship, and every once in a while it's like, I want to tune out and just read some fiction and turn that part of my brain off for a little while.
No, I love a good spy thriller, or, yep.
One more question in the similar vein. What's on your playlist right now? You're in the one of the music capitals of Europe. What are you listening to these days?
I have a very eclectic kind of music, a taste in music, because I listen from everything from like, I listen to a lot of foreign language music because it helps me kind of maintain my proficiency and fluency in many of these. So, I'm listening to everything from like Cerebro's Mama Luba and like Russian to some Bollywood hit and like Hindi to some Qawwali, which is like music from it's like Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan and stuff like that. Music from northwestern India, and then I'm listening to a bit of classical. But I'm a sucker for like just basically any cheesy hit. So anything that's on Kiss FM in Berlin, I'm probably like skipping a beat to that.
Nice. Well, I'm surprised I didn't hear Florida Man saying Leonard Skinner in there too. But Jag Singh, thank you so much for taking the time, inviting me into your lovely office, and having this conversation.
Gerrit, come back and visit anytime. It's been a real pleasure.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much. Well, folks, that was Jag Singh, Managing Director of Techstars Berlin and one of Europe's most active angel investors. If you're interested in learning more about Jag's work, go to techstars.berlin or find him on Twitter at Jag Singh. That's JAGSINGH. Coming soon in episode 8, we'll speak with Verena Huberts, WHU alum and co-founder of Berlin-based startup Kitchen Stories. If you like good food, appreciate badass founders, and believe in building lifestyles as much as you do businesses, this episode is for you. Bis nächstes Mal.